It was a tense morning in Ouagadougou, May 2025. President Ibrahim Traoré had barely opened his eyes when a secure call from Defense Minister Colonel Kashoum Koulibaly came through. "Mr. President, it's urgent. We've intercepted American intelligence. You need to see this now." Within minutes, Ibrahim was dressed and walking briskly through the marbled corridors of the presidential palace. The command center buzzed with urgency. On the long table were sealed documents, each marked with CIA and Pentagon emblems. He looked up. "What are we dealing with?" he asked. Colonel Koulibaly flipped one of the files open. "Operation Sahel Reset," he said. "A covert U.S. plan to destabilize African nations that don't align with Washington's interests, and Burkina Faso is at the top of the list." The documents were horrifying. Psychological operations, economic sabotage, infiltration of media, bribery of politicians, and, if necessary, full-blown regime change. Ibrahim stood silently for a moment, absorbing it all. "How many U.S. citizens are currently in the country?" he asked. 747 registered. "Our intelligence shows 700 have connections, direct or indirect, to U.S. agencies," said Major Umaru Sawado, head of national intelligence. At 35, Ibrahim had faced insurgents, sanctions, and misinformation. But this was something else. "Call an emergency session of the National Security Council. I want everyone in the palace within 2 hours," he ordered. "And as for the Americans," he paused, "they have 48 hours to leave." At the U.S. Embassy in Ouagadougou, Ambassador William Henderson was still sipping morning coffee when a storm began to brew. Across the capital, top ministers and military leaders gathered around Ibrahim in the war room. He stood before them, stoic and resolute. "Gentlemen, we are facing a threat not from within, but from Washington itself. These are not rumors. These are CIA-authenticated documents." Dr. Alonso Ouedraogo, Minister of Foreign Affairs, skimmed through a folder. "They're treating us like a colony." Ibrahim walked them through the plan's 3 stages: economic destabilization through sanctions and trade blockages, psychological operations to divide the population, support for opposition groups, a euphemism for regime change. "This explains the sudden trade obstacles with China and Russia," said Minister of Economy Vitimata Sawado. "It wasn't random." Major Sawado added, 340 of the Americans are ex-military, 180 have intelligence backgrounds, 125 work with questionable NGOs, and 55 claim to be journalists without any credentials. Ibrahim slammed his fist gently on the table. "They all leave, no exceptions. And if Washington objects," Colonel Koulibaly asked, "then we release what we know to the entire world." At 2 p.m., Ibrahim dictated an official letter in his private office. Behind him, the national flag waved gently. "Your Excellency William Henderson, we have uncovered documents proving the involvement of your citizens in intelligence operations on our soil. Operation Sahel Reset is a clear violation of our sovereignty. You are hereby given 48 hours to withdraw the 700 individuals connected to these operations." He paused again, then added, "These documents will be sent to the African Union, the United Nations, and international media." By 3:30 p.m., Dr. Ouedraogo arrived at the U.S. Embassy. The moment he handed the letter to Ambassador Henderson, the diplomat's face drained of color. "This must be a misunderstanding," he stuttered. 48 hours is not enough." "It is more than enough," said Dr. Ouedraogo, his tone sharp but calm. "We suggest you begin evacuations immediately inside the U.S. Embassy." Panic exploded. Shredders roared. Hard drives were wiped. CIA agents, no longer concealed by their titles, scrambled. The station chief, Agent Miller, issued a code red. "We're compromised. Evacuation protocol. Now." Back in the streets of Ouagadougou, word spread like wildfire. Crowds gathered peacefully, stunned by the magnitude of the revelation. 700 Americans expelled, blasted radio headlines. President Ibrahim exposes U.S. plot. By 6 p.m. Ibrahim entered a packed press room. Ladies and gentlemen of the international press, today I expose a covert American operation threatening not just Burkina Faso, but all of Africa. On the screen behind him, Operation Sahel Reset, classified, CIA, gasps, filled the room. This is not speculation. We have documents, wire transfers, and recordings. We've caught them red-handed. He showed intercepted transcripts, discussions about neutralizing, African leaders disrupting trade and promoting uprisings. A journalist from BBC asked if the documents were authentic. Yes, Ibrahim responded. They're not just real, they're damning. By the time the press conference ended, over 200 million people had viewed it online. Global headlines erupted. Traoré defies America. Africa unites against CIA infiltration. In Washington, the White House was in chaos. Trump, now visibly livid, slammed his fist on the table. How did this African kid get CIA documents? The CIA scrambled for answers, but the damage was done. Meanwhile, the African Union called for an emergency summit. 54 member states demanded a formal explanation. In China and Russia, top officials issued fierce condemnations of American imperialism. Even in Europe, governments voiced concern. On social media, hashtags like #IbrahimTruth and #Sahel Reset went viral. The streets of Ouagadougou roared with unity. Ibrahim protected us from recolonization. People chanted. Africa is not a puppet. Inside the airport, scenes of desperation played out. Supposed tourists rushed to flee, abandoning equipment, documents, even vehicles. Some were caught destroying evidence in bathrooms. Others burned files in parking lots. Ibrahim, watching through surveillance footage, turned to Dr. Ouedraogo. Look how they flee when exposed. They weren't tourists, the minister replied. They were spies, and now they're running. 23 failed to leave before the deadline. They were detained, including senior CIA operative Robert Mitchell, posing as an NGO director. On him, a list of politicians secretly funded to sabotage Ibrahim's government. We now have a map of the betrayal, Major Sawado reported. The next day, another press conference. This time, the collaborators. Yesterday, we showed you the foreign hand. Ibrahim said, today, we show you the local ones who took that hand in secret. A list of names, photos, payment amounts. Deputy Karim Ouedraogo, $340,000 to oppose China deals. Ex-Minister Paul Sawado, $180,000 to leak cabinet plans. Journalists, union leaders, even military officers bought. This is the price of betrayal, said Ibrahim. A CNN reporter asked what would happen to them. Justice, Ibrahim replied, with transparency and with the full weight of the law. Several tried to flee. One was caught at the airport with a suitcase full of US dollars. Africa is no longer for sale, Ibrahim declared. Trump, cornered, held a press conference. Ibrahim stole American secrets. That's an act of war. When a journalist pressed him on whether Operation Sahel Reset was real, he hesitated. I'm not commenting on intelligence operations, but the damage was irreversible. That night, Ibrahim tweeted, Trump confirmed the documents are real by calling them classified. Thank you for verifying our evidence. #Sahel Reset, #African Sovereignty. The tweet went viral again. 6 months later, everything had changed. Across the continent, nations followed Ibrahim's lead. Mali, Niger, Chad, one by one, American bases were closed. French influence waned. New partnerships bloomed. Burkina Faso's economy surged. New investments flowed from China, Russia, India, and the Arab world. GDP jumped 23% within months of the expulsion. At the UN General Assembly in New York, Ibrahim stood before the world. Africa is not your experiment, not your lab, not your project. We are sovereign. The room thundered with applause. Even traditional American allies stood in quiet solidarity. Trump, meanwhile, faced congressional hearings. These unauthorized operations are a global scandal, one senator said. And then the moment history would remember. In Oslo, Ibrahim Traoré received the Nobel Peace Prize. This award, he said, holding the golden medal, belongs not to me, but to every African who refused to bow. We will never be colonies again. From classified documents to global revolution, the message was clear. Operation Sahel Reset failed, but Africa reset itself.